I'm really excited to get this video out there to you guys. Today I'm going to show 10 good, bad, and ugly paramotor videos and share my thoughts from the perspective of an instructor. This video is a bit of a nod to Tucker Gott, who does our sport a huge favor by analyzing crash videos. And I really appreciate how he provides input both on the cause and how the incident could have been prevented in the first place. I really feel like there aren't enough of these types of videos out there. Please understand, however, that I am only human, and while I'm going to do my best to provide the insight with the limited context that I have, as it turns out, I am not omniscient. So if you are a pilot that I am reviewing, I highly encourage you to provide more context in the comment section below so that we can do a better job understanding exactly what's going on in each of these videos. Without further ado, leave a like, subscribe to this channel for more of this educational paramotor content, and let's go ahead and jump right into the first video. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the video once through without any commentary, and then we'll play it again and I'll kind of analyze and give my thoughts. So here's Tony's first launch here. So one of the things that I'd like to reinforce as a good thing in this video is his nice and early but smooth application of throttle. As soon as that wing got overhead-ish, he started rolling on that power, and that's really going to make for really efficient and smooth, cool looking launches. The other thing I like seeing Tony doing here is watching a wingtip as it's coming up. If you can maintain your forward motion and keep your hips square to the wing while just receiving some information from a wingtip, it's really going to give you a leg up in the control phase and transitioning into getting ready to take off. Moving on to the first issue I noticed was his hand positioning with those A's. So notice that his arms never really come up like they're supposed to place those A's in a position that's really going to help that wing come all the way up and settle overhead. He gets them to about chest level, and that's where he releases. And you'll notice here in the trailing edge that there is not an insignificant amount of deflection going on. It's slowing that glider down and it's keeping it in that what I call the power zone, or where your glider is really acting as a parachute instead of a wing. And if we play this video forward, we now see that his hands are coming lower, adding more deflection in that glider, and despite the smooth and steady application of power, Tony is in this contradictory configuration where his hands are braking the glider while his feet and power are asking him to fly. And we can see how the wing responds to this, and it just isn't getting that invitation to go. So what I would encourage Tony to do here is that as he gets those arms all the way up with those A's, he releases those A's up high. Bring those hands down to about ear level where you could poke your thumbs into your ears, and keep a nice goalpost position with those forearms. This will help ensure that you're not pulling brake pressure inadvertently. The other thing I like to tell students is that if you can see your hands in your peripheral vision, they're too far forward, and you got to get those hands back so that you're not pulling brake pressure forward. Any distance you're moving your hands away from those brake pulleys, be it forward, to the side, or down, is going to bring in deflection to that trailing edge, and it's going to ask that wing to come back down behind you. The other thing I noticed Tony doing here, I know I'm just ripping you apart, my friend, is his eyes are locked onto that wing for the duration of the taxi. While it might feel like the appropriate thing to do to be constantly getting visual information from your glider, this is not helping your forward motion. You are a pilot, and your eyes need to be down that runway to ensure that A, you're staying on it, and B, that you're not approaching the end of it. So when we look up, not only do we lose the horizon as a very helpful reference point, aiding in our balance and that point that we want to move towards, you're also not able to move quick enough to generate the airspeed that that wing really needs for takeoff. And you do not want to make up for this with just adding power. So that is my diagnosis on this first video. Let's go ahead and move on to the second one here. We've got Tony again for another attempt at a launch. Okay, starting off with the good things that I saw, the obvious point being that you did get in the air, so that's awesome. Let's go ahead and check out how you did on this release. Okay, those hands were much higher up when you released those A's. I would say that it was still a touch early. We want to release those A's once that wing is over our head and we have felt a release in the tension in those lines that is indicative of the wing getting all the way through that power zone and settling over our head. This being said, you don't want to hang on to those A's too long, as this could result in a front tuck. So find the balance here. Again, my cue is when I feel that release in the tension, then I release the A's. I'm also noticing that there's a little bit more intention to your application of power, which in this case is what got you in the sky. So good job with that as well. Now again, we are noticing some of the habits that you have here. The first one being that our hands just like to come a little bit low to feel the glider. While this seems like the right thing to do because you're actually feeling what that wing is doing, it's contradicting yourself. I'll tell a student that if you do not feel anything over your head and that motor is getting lighter gradually, this is your green light. So keep those hands nice and high, let the wing fly. Again, we have this tendency to look up at the glider as well, which is just slowing you down until you're able to bring in enough power to actually make up for that lack of speed. The other thing I would suggest to a pilot that has a hard time taking his eyes off that glider during launch is to kite your wing and force yourself to not look at it. This is really going to help sensitize you to the inputs that glider is sending you down those telephone wire lines. And the more you kite without a motor, the more you're going to pick up on those clues when it comes time to actually put that motor on your back, which tends to dampen the communication between you and your wing. The pilots in this sport that end up progressing the fastest to a high level of competence are the ones that are able to kite religiously. The other final thing that I'll point out is your hands are a little out to the side, and ideally we bring those hands into our shoulders for launch. This is pulling just enough brake pressure to apply a little bit of deflection in that trailing edge, virtually giving you flaps that would be on an airplane, shortening your takeoff distance. But when our hands are away from our body, it's harder to calculate how much pressure we're pulling, and it's also easier for the motion of our body to make unintentional inputs on that glider as well. Not a big deal, and I'm kind of being picky at this point. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention that I really liked from this launch was his posture. His body position is leaning back, providing a more horizontal thrust vector that is getting him into the sky just a few steps sooner. So bravo, Tony. Let's move on to the third video here. This is my friend Mark. So based on the slight pause he takes during the inflation, I'm guessing that there is a good amount of wind in this case. But for one reason or another, no two launches are the same. The wing ends up rolling to the left pretty abruptly here. It may have been because that left hand came down a little bit stronger than the right hand to catch the surge. When you're dealing with a little extra wind like Mark is in this scenario, you need to check those brakes to keep that wing from overshooting and doing a frontal tuck. So that left hand may have come down a little bit stronger than the right hand, causing that wing to roll left suddenly. Again, I don't know exactly what happened here, but what I'd like you to really notice here is how consistent he moves into that wind direction. He doesn't start stepping towards the low side of the glider. He just moves forward to generate airspeed, because speed is life and speed is control. The more you have, the more responsive that wing is going to be, and the more likely it is to actually come up and over your head. The other thing that I love seeing Mark do here is checking his wingtips. He's double checking everything looks good, that wing is in fact overhead before rolling on that power smooth to full and getting in the air. Very nicely done. Good save, Mark. Moving on to video number 4. Casey here is attempting to launch. He's gonna come off of the left side of the screen here. Bit of a confusing one, as this took me a little while to analyze and assess. Let me first identify exactly what is happening here, and then go into some of the potential causes to this problem. So it looks like we come on that power fairly abruptly, and when we do, there's a good amount of turn in Casey's body to the left. This leads me to believe that there's a good amount of torque twist generated by this motor. Torque twist happens for two reasons. The first is the motor and your body's tendency to turn away from the propeller. Newton's law of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So while this will roll your body, leaning you away from the direction that you want to actually be going in, the second factor here to identify is the fact that when you're leaning back, getting ready for that launch, the descending blade is actually grabbing and pushing more air than the ascending blade. Casey's right half of the propeller is generating more thrust than the left half, not only rotating his body to the left, but now turning his body to the left, pushing him in that direction, while the wing is still fixated on the heading prior to this application of power. As we can see here, this causes the wing to roll right, and when any aircraft is in the banked turn, its lifting profile is now diminished, limiting how much lift it's generating, in this case on takeoff. Another factor that could be leading into this is the wing's porosity. I don't know how old this glider is, but the older your fabric, the less air that fabric is able to seal inside of it, which dramatically decreases the wing's ability to get you airborne. Let me back up and identify something that I really liked about this launch, and that is Casey's legs. They're always fighting to stay on the ground, which is a really important part of this whole ordeal. And in this case, it would have paid off if the wing wasn't dipping so hard to the right. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to video 2. I'll go ahead and play it through. Way to get back on the horse, Casey. Okay, another potential cause to dramatic torque twist can be your hang points being too far forward. In other words, you and your motor are leaning too far back, accentuating the discrepancy in the two blades and how much air they are grabbing on either side. So what I'm noticing in this video is with those hang points potentially too far forward, that seat board is kicking you in the back of the legs, Casey, and it's that office chair prank that's really hard to resist. And the further forward your hang points are, the stronger that push is going to be when that wing picks up that motor off of your back. The inflation looks really nice. You release the A's appropriately. You start rolling on that power, we get into posture, and there's this abrupt scoop action that takes place, kicking you up into the seat. And while the wing is able to pick up the motor, it's not quite ready to pick up the 200 pounds attached to it. And sadly, we suffer another crunch. Something else I am identifying Casey is doing is leaning pretty far forward during the taxi. If you're leaning too far forward and you start bringing that power smooth to full, that wing will start picking up that motor. And because that motor is leaning back, when it gets picked up and it starts to pick you up, it's gonna swing forward. And if this is the seat board, it's gonna scoop you right into it. So if the hang points aren't the issue, it might be the posture leading into the actual full throttle takeoff. Again, no matter what, we wanna keep those feet on the ground for as long as possible and really fight that urge to sit down in that comfy lawn chair and keep on running. The bigger your strides are with your legs, the better, as doing so is going to keep your thigh pushing that seat board back and keeping it at bay. I really like to see people running into the sky instead of just sitting down when they feel like there's enough lift. There's no room for hope in aviation. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next video. Back to Mark here. What I think Mark is demonstrating here really nicely is how to abort properly. He doesn't stay hammered on that gas hoping things work out until that wing is back on the ground. He's identifying the problem nice and early, realizing it's not going to work out, and he's cutting that motor and taking steps back towards that wing so it fluffs down nicely onto that asphalt. Now let's identify some of the issues going on in this video. The first thing I'm identifying here as a potential problem is the limited physical margin that Mark has given himself here. You can see the snowbank out in front of him here, and he let me know that he was aiming for the gap in the snowbanks when it came time to actually take off. So now he's in a situation that is escalating a little bit of pressure for you mentally, and you're more likely to rush through the steps. And we can see here how Mark has released those A's just a tad early, so that wing is staying just on the outer edge of that power zone behind him. And then he brings those arms down to feel control or to potentially catch the surge like he's in the habit of doing on a normal runway where he has followed through with those A's. He starts adding power very soon after because he wants to start gaining some speed so that he can expediently get things under control. But with these arms as low as they are, we can see again this contradictory statement that Mark is making to that glider. And you can see now how that glider is just falling further and further into that power zone. And as soon as Mark feels that, he kills that motor immediately, stops moving forward, and then starts taking steps back to relieve the tension in the lines and allow that glider to fluff nicely down onto the pavement. Moving on to the next video here, we've got his buddy James, who is just filming him on his helmet, and we're gonna watch him attempt the snowbank crossing. So unfortunately, the lack of physical margin for James here does not end quite as peacefully, although I understand that he was totally okay after the dust had settled. So if we play it one more time, you'll notice that as James gets things going, that wing inflated finally, but at the moment he starts bringing in power, I think he realizes just how close that snowbank is, and without F1 level of judgment and reaction time, he's in a bit of a mental trap here. If he had aborted at the time he started adding power, he likely would have had to run off that speed and end up in the snowbank anyway, and then have to reset and try again. And I could definitely see myself making the same judgment call in this situation. Yeah, that snowbank's close, gun it, hope for the best. I think I can get off the ground before this embankment. So the best solution I could see to preventing something like this from happening again is that when you have limited launching distance, create a marker for yourself that indicates where you must be airborne at, or you're going to abort the takeoff altogether. This could be a person filming you, it could be a traffic cone, it could be a stick on the ground, but ideally it's something that you cannot miss out of your peripheral view as you're checking your wingtips and going through your control phase. I'm glad you're okay, James. That did not look very comfortable. Alrighty, back to Mark here in one of his first launches. So the first thing that I noticed here that I really liked, other than Judson's dashing good looks, is Mark's hand positioning upon inflation. Not too low where that hoop is gonna catch those lines and prevent them from easily sliding out and around, and not too high to where you're closing that leading edge, preventing a nice clean inflation. The other thing I like seeing here, which is a controversial subject, is a little bit of power prior to the inflation. This helps your leg generate enough power and speed for a nice snappy inflation in no wind conditions, or if there is wind, it helps bolster you when that glider enters the power zone so that you can continue moving forward, or at least hold your ground. The energy you can save with a powered forward can translate to very smooth, in control launches like you're seeing here. However, understand this strategy does not come without its risks. The involuntary sympathetic muscle response can really do a number here. As you're gripping those A's, you're also squeezing those hands, and you do not want to grab a handful of throttle with those lines right by that cage, as it can lead to lines getting caught in the propeller as well as your hands. What Mark does here, as I know Judson briefed him on, is to let go of that power if you're going to change it at all. Ideally, you can maintain a constant power setting throughout the inflation, but if you're going to change it all, just let that power go. So now with that wing overhead and in control, Mark brings in power somewhat abruptly here, but he feels that and gives a moment to let things settle before going smooth to full, not to mention with some really nice posture. If I was going to be really picky, I would have told Mark that he needs to run a little bit longer into that sky, just in case there was a sudden loss of lift, either due to the engine or Mother Nature. You just never know. Keep those feet moving. All right, the next one here has Mark doing some high wind kiting. If you are comfortable doing so, getting out into wind like this can build a lot of wing sense, as I like to call it. Without the weight of the motor, you and your wing are really intimately connected, and you will pick up a lot of cues as to what that glider actually needs and when it needs it. If only your wife could benefit from this. All joking aside, this will monumentally improve your flying skills, as any time you spend under the glider, whether it's in the air or on the ground, is adding to your skill level and understanding of the sport as a whole. So early on here, Mark ends up taking a frontal collapse due to a sudden gust of wind, most likely. And as he feels the lines going slack, he's able to quickly turn and face the glider, which is the pro move. If he were not to turn around quickly, that wing is now in a parachute position and it's gonna pull him right on his back if he's not facing the beast. I'm also noticing a good amount of bend in his knees, which is a great move to stay flexible and agile, and also prepared for any sudden increases in wind. It allows you to spring up and also get low should that wind die down. I also really like how intentional he is about getting his back into the wind, really giving himself some clear reference as to where that wind is coming from and providing that wing with a solid anchor point to pivot around given the correct inputs. Oftentimes I notice pilots getting the wing to the side like this and then turning their backs crosswind either towards the glider or away from the glider. And in either case, this does not help the wing come back up to center. In this case, however, the glider is being a little stubborn, and with too much pressure on the high side that he's giving here, the wing scoops more air than Mark's body is able to anchor down, and he's end up pulled downwind. Not ungracefully though, I might add, and he does a very nice job immediately grabbing a tip line right there to flip the wing on its nose and then pulls it in to disengage the glider altogether. If you are going to go out into wind like this, I highly recommend wearing gloves, as you do not want to have to grab lines and then have those lines slip out when a gust of wind comes. It's not very fun. You will feel it for weeks. Moving right along here, we've got Tony coming in for a landing. One of the first things I noticed here is how smooth and in control his body looks during this approach. He swings out of his turn onto final just a little bit, but then he compensates for this by pulling both brakes down to his shoulders for just a moment. It cancels the oscillation that would be occurring. And you'll notice this also causes a little bit of a surge in speed once he gets those hands back up, but he is plenty high enough for that wing to find its speed equilibrium, if you will, before touchdown, which is the key point. When it comes time to the flare, it is very nice and controlled here, giving it just enough to level off and then a little more to keep it level for touchdown. If I'm gonna be really nitpicky here, I would have those hands coming down an instant before touchdown, straight down to the pockets, giving you the slowest possible landing speed. This also shortens up your runway to the smallest amount, but again, this is more style points anyway. Super quick thanks to these people right here that are sponsoring this content here on YouTube by subscribing to me over on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Without this support, I'm not able to dedicate the time, energy, and love it takes to publish this content at the quality and frequency that I do. That is going to do it for this video, folks. Drop a question, comment, or a snide remark down in the comment section below. And if you are looking to improve or develop a very useful technique known as hand kiting, you'll be interested in checking out this video right here. This is Lifted PPG. My name is Micah Stevens. Don't forget to take a deep breath, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.